Negative Dialectics in the Critique of Economic Objectivity by Werner Bonefeld, 2016. Introduction. The article presents Adorno's negative dialectics as a critique of society in the form of the economic object. It takes its cues from Max Horkheimer's remark that human beings produce, through their own labor, a reality that increasingly enslaves them, and that therefore Marx's critique of political economy amounts to a judgment of an existence. The account starts with a section on economic objectivity as the subject matter of negative dialectics. It argues that, for Adorno, historical materialism is a critique of the false society, one that is governed by the movement of real economic abstractions. The following section discusses Adorno's dictum that society remained class struggle. It argues that class is a negative category and develops this point in the context of Adorno's critique of the capitalist exchange relation. The final section, looking on the bright side of the wronged world, is the conclusion. It sums up the political implication of the negative dialectics of economic objectivity, according to which Marx's critique is the modern manifestation of philosophy's search for the good and reasonable organization of life. It holds that there is a tenderness only in the coarsest demand, that no one should go hungry anymore. Economic Objectivity in its Critique on Negative Dialectics. The title of the article contains two seeming paradoxes. First, it contends that Adorno's critical social theory amounts to a critique of the constitutive relations of economic objectivity. This is not a common view. Martin J. and Jürgen Habermas no less have argued that Adorno's critical theory did not concern itself with political economy or economics, be it bourgeois economics or Marxian economics. However, what would be a critical theory of society amounts to, if it were not to concern itself, with the manner in which society maintains itself. Why really does this content, human social reproduction, take the form of seemingly self-moving economic forces? The second paradox derives from the first paradox, which supposes a connection between Adorno's social theory and the critique of economic objectivity beyond the disciplinary divide between economics and sociology. According to the established view, sociology deals with the relationship between people. It analyzes interpersonal relationships without paying too much attention to their objectified economic forms. It observes the social relations, analyzes the social facts, and attributes meaning to them. It then classifies their social attributes into ideal typical models of social interaction, without ever once asking itself why society organizes its reproduction in the form of independent economic categories, of price and profit, cash and product. It considers the comprehension of the form of social wealth, the production of wealth and the distribution as economic matters. However, like sociology, economics, as a dedicated science of economic matter, does not pay attention to the objectified economic forms either. Indeed, economics recognizes economic quantities, represents their movements with mathematical accuracy, rationalizes the economic aspects of society with the help of algebraic formulae, predicts on the basis of available economic data what markets will do next, describes the manner in which the human agent adjusts to market demands for the sake of achieving greater economic efficacy, and explores the means of states as the public authority of economic regulation to achieve optimum factor efficiency, for the sake of economic progression, measures the rate of growth. Economics amounts to a science of the relationship of the economic things amongst themselves. For the science of economic matter, the unemployed represent an economic zero, lacking both in productive contribution and effective demand. That is, for economic thought, the essence of economics is not the satisfaction of individual human needs. Rather, the essence of economics is its economic nature, which it presumes to be valid because of itself. Yet it does not tell us what it is. Economics ascribes subjective power to economic things and argues that the movement of economic quantities expresses value preferences, which reveal a rationality of economic action that expresses itself by price movements, which manifests the dynamic of competition that is supposed to keep the whole process alive, and even cause it to progress as if it were moved by a, quote, invisible hand. As if by magic, the invisible hand of the market is supposed to transform private vices into public virtues, taking care of both the beggar and the king. For the sake of economic insight into the social laws that govern the reproduction society, it translates quantities of capital into algebraic and, on the condition of undistorted competition in undivided markets, assigns the power of economic regulation to some omnipotent invisible hand that tells the social individuals what to buy, where to invest, and how to achieve optimum factor efficiency of its human capital. There really is, as Dirk Bronstein remarks dryly, no economist by the name of Adorno, nor is there a sociologist by the name of Adorno. According to Adorno, negative dialectics flouts tradition, and he argues that the division between economics and sociology sets aside the really central interest of both disciplines. Neither focus on the manner in which society organizes the satisfaction of its needs, and neither concerns itself with the specific form of capitalist wealth and its production. Instead, in the hands of the economists, economic laws are metamorphosized into a pretended law of nature, and for the sociologist, society is nothing but the average of individual reactive moves. Both disciplines recognize that the social conflicts have yet to do with the competitive struggle over the distribution of wealth. Who gets what and how much? Yet, neither scrutinize the manner of its production. What is entirely overlooked is that this conflict of interest, as manifested in competition, is itself a diluted derivation of much deeper conflicts, those between classes. The former conflicts are really the ones which take place after the central conflict over control of the means of production has already been decided, so that the competition is carried on within the sphere of an already appropriated surplus value. A few notable exceptions apart, there is hardly a book or journal article that raises the issue of economic objectivity and its class character as a topic of negative dialectics, and this despite Adorno's insistence that a, quote, critical theory of society is represented prototypically by that of Marx. Marx, Adorno argues, directed his critique of political economy at the substance of society, that is, the social production and reproduction of the life of society as a whole. For Marx, the term of inquiry into the mode of production, human subsistence, is the social relation of production, that is, the actual, given relations of life which have become apotheosized in the form of seemingly self-moving economic forces that economic science sets out to calculate with mathematical precision, and that sociology fails to recognize when it investigates interpersonal relations based on income, labor market positions, education, status, gender, health, etc. Adorno captures this process of inversion of the social relations in the seemingly self-moving economic forces when he argues that the objective rationality of society, namely that of exchange, continues to distance itself through its own dynamic from the model of logical reason. Consequently, society, what has been made independent, is in turn no longer intelligible, only the law of becoming independent is intelligible. The recognition of society as an autonomic economic subject entails its critique. What constitutes the economic independence of society and what appears in the appearance of society as a movement of real economic abstractions, upon which the life of all men hangs. Social reproduction governed by real economic abstractions entails both chance and necessity, which are experienced as fate. The mythological idea of fate becomes no less mythical when it demythologized into a secular logic of things, that on the pain of ruin judges the actions of the actual individuals by means of competing price signals. Fate is a category of a ghost-like society. Its secret is, however, not some invisible hand that regulates the economic progress of society as if by magic, rather what manifests itself behind the backs of the acting subjects is their own work. As if their own work that condemns them as economic characters mask or personifications of economic categories. Neither the capitalist nor the banker, nor indeed the worker who can extricate themselves from the reality in which they live and which asserts itself not only over them, but also through them and by means of them in this society. The social relations do not appear as direct social relations between persons and their work, but rather as material relations between persons and social relations between things. Adorno's conception of dialectics has to be understood against this background. He conceives of it as the ontology of the wrong state of things. It is to ascertain what is active in things and hold sway in them. His critical theory refuses thus to lend itself to sanctioning things as they are, intended as a theory without affirmative traits. It purports to demystify rigidified thing like congealed relationships, rendering them immediacy transparent as social constituted things. For example, Marx writes that in the money fetish, a social relation, a definite relation between individuals, appears as a metal, a stone, a purely physical external thing, which can be found as such in nature, and which is indistinguishable and forms from its natural existence. There is only one world, and that is the world of appearance. However, what is appearance an appearance of, and what therefore appears in appearance? Social objectivity does not lead a life of its own. That is to say, the relationship between coins is a socially constituted relationship of economic objectivity. It does not derive from some presumed economic nature. The social relations vanish in their economic appearance as a relationship between coined metals, and this appearance is real. Economic objectivity imposes itself over the social individual because it prevails in and through them. What appears in the appearance of society as stone or a coin is thus a definite social relationship between individuals subsisting as a relationship between coins. In this coin relationship, the social individuals vanish, only to reappear as personalities of economic reason, calculating the movement of economic quantities, winning and losing, and struggling for money-based access to subsistence. Adorno therefore argues that all events, even the philosophical ones, refer to non-conceptualities. Say the economic concept of profit entails what it is not. That is, it entails the definite social relations between individuals as the vanished premise of its economic force. What is vanished cannot be conceptualized. That is, definite social relations between men themselves, which assume here for them the fantastic form of relation between things, and in this form, man appears as a mere economic derivative, a mere character mask of its own social world, mere human material for money which is worth more money value, which is greater than itself. Capital, which begets a profit, the social individuals are thus not visible in the movement of economic quantities and appear as metaphysical distractions to the economic analysis of things economic. This distraction is all important. Capital is not a mystical being of nature, it is a mystical being of a definite form of social relations. Critically conceived, then, historical materialism opens up the non-conceptual with the aid of the concept, without reducing it to concept. Rather, it explores the economic concept from within, and in this manner it extinguishes the autarky of the concept, strips the blindfold from our eyes. That is, the concept is a concept, even when dealing with things, and being does not change the fact that, on its part, it is intertwined with the non-conceptual whole. That is, man as the vanished subject in her actual relations of life. For Adorno, therefore, the notion of historical materialism as a materialism of some historically unfolding force of production is in its entirety tied to the natural appearance of the existing social relations. At its best, historical materialism is not a metaphysics of economic nature in its objectivity unfolding forces. Rather, it is a critique of economic nature, one that dissolves the dogma of natural necessity on its social basis. Economic nature is a social nature, and the seemingly independent economic forces manifest, therefore, the actual relations of life in the form of natural economic forces. Adorno thus argues that historical materialism is a dissolution of things understood as dogmatic. It comprehends the social relations of production as a constituent of the forces of production. Man vanishes in her economic appearance, and her own sensuous practice manifests itself as the practice of supersensible economic things that makes the world go round, not despite the social individuals, but rather in and through, and by means of them. What prevails over the society exists through society. In its entirety, the world of economic objectivity is a world of human practice, and however perverted in the form of seemingly self-moving economic things, the economic world remains a human world. Thus, in the face of mythical economic properties and forces, of value as a thing in itself, value as nature, Adorno's critical theory rejects the scientific doctrine of invariance. It identifies some historically active economic nature, which unfolds according to its own innate laws of development. Instead, it aims at the thing itself from within its own context, even if in the end it negates the whole sphere it moves in. That was a banger. The circumstance that the actual relations of life manifest themselves in the form of the economic object defines the negative character of Adorno's dialectic. Dialectics thinks against the dazzling spell of the supersensible world of economic value. That is, it thinks against the flow of the world, and contradictions for the sake of the contradiction once experienced in the thing and against that contradiction. It is suspicious of all identity, and therefore resists the temptation to identify reified economic things. Adorno, 1990. What appears in reification? What appears as society as a relationship between the economic things and their price tag. This appearance is real. Truth exists as an existing untruth. Marx's conception of the commodity as a sensuous, supersensible thing recognizes that the resolution to the dialectical context of immanence is that context itself. The fetishism of commodities does not disguise the real social relations of capital. Rather, the fetishism of commodities expresses the real social relations in the form of capital as the automated subject of society. The social individual is governed by the price mechanism, belongs to the price mechanism, and acts through the price mechanism as the economic form that governs access to the means of subsistence. Subsistence comes with a price tag, and the social individuals carry their bond with society in their wallets. That's good. The independent movement of the economic forces of cash and product manifests the objective necessity of the existing relations of social reproduction to which we owe everything and that yet threaten to bury us all. The critical intention of what Adorno called the ad hominem critique of political economy is the demystification of economic categories as sensuous, supersensible things. Within themselves, they contain the sensuous practice of the actual relations of life as their constitutive premise. Sensuative practice exists in and through those same supersensible things that govern the social individual as personifications of their own social world. Adorno captures this idea of a socially constituted world of a sensuous supersensible economic nature well. The supersensible world, which is the inverted world, has thus transcended the other world, the supersensuous world, and contains it within itself, for itself as inverted world that is inverted in and of itself is itself and its opposite in their unity. Rather than replacing the object by the subject, be it the subject of history as an objectivity unfolding force of man or self, as being in alienation, or indeed economic beings as an ontological force that, in the last instance, colonizes a supposedly separate life world of social action, Adorno's dialectical theory, like Marx's, sets out to comprehend the social subject in the form of the object, which is the mode of existence of the subject. Just as objectivity without subject is no thing, subjectivity detached from its object is fictitious. Man is a social being qua objectification. Man is always objectified man. That is, demythologization of society in the form of the economic object is therefore more than just a matter of reductio ad hominem of its independent coercive force over the social individuals. It is also a reductio hominis, an insight into the illusion of the subject that will style itself as an absolute. Subjectivity means objectification. To be an object is part of the meaning of subjectivity. The issue that the critique of fetishism brings into the fore is not the subject's objectification, but its reified mode. What is reified? Appearance is the enchantment of the subject in its own world. Society is the inverted form of the economic object. It is governed by the movement of the incomprehensible economic quantities. The idea of the bewitched world is entirely abstract in distinction to a traditional theory which analyzes the empirical veracity of incomprehensible economic forces. Critical theory sets out to dissolve their dogmatic posturing by negating the whole spirit it moves in. Just as the critique of religion does not criticize God on the basis of God, the critique of political economy does not criticize the real economic abstractions on the basis of real economic abstractions. Rather, the critique of religion deciphers the social relation that assumes the form of God and vanish in the idea of God, only to reappear as a cowed believers in God, mere human derivation of divine rule. Similarly, the critique of economic objectivity is not a critique from the standpoint of economic nature. Like the critique of religion, it too deciphers the definite social relations that manifest themselves in mysterious, seemingly extra-mundane economic forms, and forces that prevail in and through the social individuals, as living personifications of the individual movement of price and profit. It thus explores the economic concept from within to comprehend the actual relations of life that appear in the form of value as a thing of nature. This appearance of value is real, as a constituted social nature in which the essence of society manifests itself in the form of fatal mischief, of a world that degrades men into means of a movement of real economic abstractions that assert themselves over and through them on a plane of ruin and disaster. Dialectics is a cunning of reason in a bewitched society. Negative dialectics is a presentation of the wrong state of things. It argues that the idea of society as a subject to natural laws is ideology if it is hypothesized as immutably given by nature. Instead, it holds that the incomprehensible economic forces that find the rational explanation in human practice and in comprehension of this practice. It thus argues that the relation of economic objectivity manifests the social nature of an inverted and perverted world of definite social relations. That is, it amounts to a conceptualized praxis of the capitalist social relations. Economic abstraction and class. I have argued that Adorno's critical theory holds that society, in the form of self-moving economic categories, is not intelligible. What remains intelligible is the law of economic autonomization in the form of objectively valid exchange relations between one economic quantity and another. The commodity form disappears as a social relation and instead asserts an abstract economic logic, which manifests and vanished social subject as a personification of economic categories. The capitalist social subject is a value subject of profitable equivalent exchange relations. The argument of this section expounds the meaning of this last sentence. It starts with an exploration of the contradictory character of profitable equivalent exchange relations. Exchange is either an exchange between equivalent values, or it is profitable. In bourgeois society, it is both, a contradiction in terms which is imminent to its reality. It then explores this value subject as a class subject, which entails an argument about class as a negative social category. In Adorno's argument, the capitalist exchange relation entails a struggle for subsistence on the part of the class tied to work, which is experienced as economic fate. The law which determines how fatality of mankind unfolds itself is the law of exchange. The exchange relations are equivalent exchange relations, which entails an exchange between equal values, between two equal value things. There is no difference or distinction. Exchange equivalence is entirely abstract in that it is indifferent to the concrete utility of the things that are exchanged. There is no difference or distinction in things of equal value. 100 pounds worth of lead or iron is as great as value of 100 pounds worth of silver and gold. That's a good one. The one is the same as any other. The act of an equivalent exchange, therefore, implies the reduction of the products to be exchanged to their equivalencies, to something abstract, but by no means, as traditional discussion would maintain, to something material. The foundation of value equivalence cannot be found in the geometrical, physical, chemical, or any other natural property of commodities. Such properties come into consideration only to the extent that they make the commodities useful, or i.e. turn them into use values. Value equivalence expresses thus something invisible that is neither divine nor natural in character. Rather, it holds sway in reality itself, and becomes visible in the money form, in which the exchange value of a commodity appears as a definite amount of value. The money form manifests thus the continually vanishing realization of value. Once value is expressed in the form of money, it has to be posited again and again to maintain its occult ability to add value to itself. Money is thrown into circulation to beget more money in the form of profit, which is realized by means of an equivalent exchange, M to M prime. The conceptuality of this bewitched reality is independent of the consciousness of the human being subjected to it. At the same time, as which it prevails only in through the social individuals themselves, failure to make a profit spells ruin and imperils wage-based access to the means of subsistence. And yet, in the form of value, the wealth of nations appears entirely intangible. Something abstract acquires validity in an exchange that appears to be regulated by an invisible hand beyond human control. What is not validated is devalued and destroyed, regardless of the human needs that could be satisfied. Money validates the value of things. Illusion dominates reality, and does so because exchange value, merely a mental configuration when compared with use value, dominates human needs and replaces them. The struggle for life is a struggle for money. It governs the mentality of bourgeois society as seemingly a thing in itself. For Adorno, this character of capitalist society is both an actuality and at the same time a necessary illusion. This illusion signifies that within the society, laws can only be implemented as natural processes over people's needs, while their validity arises from the form of the relations of production within which production takes place. Understanding of the relations of production is key to unlocking the social constitution of money as the automatic fetish of capitalist wealth. Adorno's negative dialectics presents the social constitution of the law of value with reference to Marx's concept of socially necessary labor time. In Adorno's words, society determined by exchange entails an abstract element that does not manifest something material in the traditional sense of the word. In fact, what is exchanged are average necessary amounts of labor time. This reduction of the product to socially labor time necessarily disregards the specific forms of objects to be exchanged. Instead, they are reduced to a universal unit. Marx's familiar definition of the social constitution of value, socially necessary labor time, is the labor time required to produce any use value under the conditions of production normally for a given society, and at the average degree of skill and intensity of labor prevalent in that society expresses the social character of the capitalist form of labor in the form of a universal commensurability of a time made abstract. This time appears in a homogeneous unit that adds to themselves, seemingly from time immemorial to eternity. Time appears as a force of its own progress, moving forward relentlessly by adding units of time to itself, as if it were a force of nature that takes and talks human life dissociated from the time of actual events. This appearance is real. In capitalism, time is ontologized. This ontologized time is the time of value, and the time of value is the time of social necessary labor. The holy trinity of social necessary labor time, and value validity in exchange is invisible. Its objectivity is spectral. Nevertheless, the ghost-like objectivity value becomes visible in the money form. Back in production, the ghost turns into a vampire that feeds on living labor, as a human material value that begets a surplus and is thus greater than itself. Socially necessary labor time is not fixed and given. The labor time that was yesterday undoubtedly socially necessary for the production of a yard of linen ceases to be so today. Whether the concrete expenditure of labor time is valid as socially necessary labor time can only be established post festum in exchange. On the pattern of ruin, the expenditure of living labor is thus done in hope that it will turn out to be socially necessary, and that will thus achieve value validity in exchange with money. Time is money, said Benjamin Franklin, and one might add that therefore money is time. That's a great way to put this. If then capitalism reduces everything to time, an abstract time divisible into equal, homogeneous, and constant units that move on from unit to unit, dissociated from concrete human circumstances and purposes, then time really is everything. If time is everything, then man is nothing. It is at the same time time's carcass, a carcass of personified labor time. Expenditure of socially valid labor does not occur in its own good time, it occurs within time, and that is the time of value as expenditure of socially necessary labor time. Normality is death. The abstraction of the exchange process lies therefore not in the abstracting mode of thought of the sociologist, but in society itself. It holds sway in reality, that is, the conversion of all commodities into labor time is no greater an abstraction, but no less real, than the resolution of all organic bodies into air. The time of capitalist labor appears in the form of a profitable accumulation of some abstract form of wealth, and money that yields more money. What cannot be turned into profit is burned. The capitalist exchange relations posit the exchange of money for more money as an equivalent exchange, M to M prime, rather than being talked in by the dazzling appearance of the money subject that brings forth living offspring. It is essential to negate things in their appearance. What appears in the appearance of an equivalent exchange of money as more money is the difference between the labor time expended by the worker and that needed for the reproduction of his life. The mysterious character of an equivalent exchange of money for more money has thus to do with the transformation of the commodity labor power into a surplus value producing labor activity, M to P to M prime. For the sake of more money, the reduction of the labor time spent by the worker to reproduce her life is of the essence. It is a condition for extending the labor time beyond the time necessary for the simple reproduction of society. This extended labor time comprises the surplus labor time that expands social wealth, creating a surplus in value in the foundation of profit. The understanding, then, of the mysterious character of an equivalent exchange between unequaled values lies in the concept of surplus value. Adorno thus argues that the equivalent exchange relations are founded on the class relationship between the owners of the means of production and the producers of surplus value, and he argues that the social relationship vanishes in its economic appearance as an exchange between one quantity of money for another. Economic thought identifies the property of economic categories as the revealed truth of society. It recognizes that the profitable accumulation of some abstract form of wealth for its own sake, money is more money, as a social necessity. Its falseness contains a social truth. Failure to make a profit entails great danger. To the vanishing point of death, the life of the seller of labor power hangs by the success of turning her labor into a profitable means for another man. The profitability of her labor is the fundamental condition of achieving and sustaining wage-based employment. The class struggle to sustain access to the means of substance and maintain labor conditions is relentless. Yesterday's profitable appropriation of some other person's surplus labor buys the labor power of another man today. The buyer, for the sake of making another profit so that he avoids bankruptcy by enriching himself, the seller in order to make a living. For the sake of her life, the avoidance of redundancy is a matter of the profitable consumption of her labor power. That is, society stays alive, not despite its antagonism, but by means of it. In distinction to traditional Marxist conceptions, to be productive laborer is not an ontologically privileged position. It is a great misfortune. In Capital, Marx develops the capitalist class relation from the sale of the commodity, labor power. In truth, however, the sale of labor power presupposes coercion as the foundation of its sale. The labor market is the institution that regulates the economic compulsion to make ends meet in the form of an equal exchange relation between the traders and labor power. Behind the freedom of labor, there is a daily struggle for the securing the means of subsistence by means of wage income. A struggle takes the form of a competition amongst sellers of labor power to achieve and maintain that income. For the seller of labor power, competition is not some abstract economic law. Rather, its conceptuality is experienced in the form of precarious labor markets, wage pressure, risk to employment, and dangers of unemployment, and thus a struggle to maintain access to subsistence. The economic calculation of the unemployed as economic zeros is not untrue. It makes clear that the life of the trader of labor power really does hang by the profitable extraction of surplus value. Laboring for the sake of a surplus in value is innate to the concept of the worker. She belongs to a system of wealth in which her labor has a utility only as a means of surplus value production. Her subsistence depends on it. Sensuous activity not only vanishes in the suspensible world of economic things, it also appears in it. A struggle to avoid the risk of bankruptcy and being cut off from subsistence. The movement of society is thus not only antagonistic from the outset, it also maintains itself only through antagonism. That is, the class struggle is the objective necessity of the fate, society, it belongs to its concept. Contrary to a whole tradition of Marxist theory, the social relations of production do not harbor within themselves a progressivist resolution. Oh, he said it! They harbor within themselves the need of profit as a condition of social reproduction. Unprofitable buyers of labor power go out of business. Profitable ones maintain demand for labor power. The profitable accumulation of yesterday's yield of surplus value is the condition of today's wage-based access to the means of subsistence. The working class struggles not for the sake of abstract ideas, it struggles to make a living. Proletarian language is dictated by hunger. The poor chew words to fill their bellies. Class struggle is entirely a negative category. It belongs to the false society. What is false is false. The whole is false. The whole has to go. Looking on the bright side of the wronged world. The traditional Marxist idea of a dialectics of theory and practice focuses on the state as instruments of socialist transformation. Under the spell of independent economic forces, it identifies the properties of economic categories as the contingent truth of a balance of class forces and demands a shift in the balance of class forces to achieve a socialist identity of the economic categories. It is, however, pure ideology to reduce economic objectivity to some economic nature and suggest that its social manifestation is entirely contingent on the balance of forces that act upon it. Adorno dismisses such thought as abstract negativity. Abstract negativity is the sniffer dog of thought. It barks in perpetuity and without bite. It sends out the miserable world from the outside, as it were, and leaves reality untouched by thought. Instead of thinking in and through society, it thinks about society. It looks on the bright side and proclaims not only to know how to set things right, but also to do so, quote, for the workers. Adorno's negative dialectics of the false society resists the bright side view. It refuses to become a piece of politics it was supposed to lead out of. Negative dialectics is critical of the social relation of economic objectivity. I have argued that, for Adorno's critical theory, the relationship between economy and society is not an external one. The point of a critical social theory is to explore the interconnection between the seemingly distinct spheres of human existence. Economic reproduction is social reproduction. It takes place in and through the perverted totality in which we live. Further, I've argued that Adorno's critical theory holds that the forces of production do not manifest some economic nature, rather they manifest congealed relations which have become autonomous objects vis-a-vis human beings. Adorno thus rejects the orthodox conception of dialectics between the forces of production as some transhistorically active economic nature and the historically specific relations of production as a perverter of Marxian motives, and criticizes it as metaphysics. Denies, he argues, the spontaneity of the subject, a move of the object dialectics of the forces and relations of production. He thus argues that the forces of production manifest relationships between human beings and not, as they appear to us, the properties of things. What therefore appears in the appearance of society as an object of economic forces is not some general economic nature that imposes itself behind the backs of the individuals as if by force of nature. Rather, what appears in the actual social relations in the form of independent economic forces. Economic extraction and such do not exist except as negative ontology of perverted social relations. Further, I have argued that society as the object of real economic abstractions, and society as the subject of life world as interpersonal relations, comprises one reality. The reality in which the social individuals move day in and day out has no invariant character, that is, something which exists independently from them. As a critical theory of society, the critique of political economy amounts to a conceptual praxis, in the form of the economic object, that is the entire meaning of the relation of production resides precisely in the fact that we are here concerned not with the direct action, but if you like, congealed action, or with some form of congealed labor, or of society in its form of independent economic forces. Economic nature is a social reality. Its reality is immanent to its own social context. Lastly, Adorno's negative dialectics of economic objectivity amounts to a class theory of the capitalist form of social wealth and its production. Society as an automatic subject of some independent economic force entails the dependent seller of labor power as the producer of surplus value. Finally, for Adorno, class struggle is not a positive category, rather it belongs to a world that is hostile to the subject. The critique of class society finds its positive resolution only in the class of society, not in a fairer class society. Contrary to the rumor about Adorno's critical theory, its negative critique of existing conditions does not entail an impoverished praxis. Rather, it entails the question of praxis. That is, Adorno's dictum that society remains class struggle does not express something positive or desirable. Rather, it amounts to a judgment on the capitalistically organized social relations of production, in which the need of human beings, the satisfaction of human beings, is never more than a sideshow. The judgment on existence entails the critique of existence. It holds that the abolition of hunger requires a change in the relations of production.